It's been a wild 24 hours for NBA free agency, and teams around the league have improved their rosters. So where do the Heat rank in the Eastern Conference? Plus, is there a star left for Miami to pursue? And who's the best available free agent still out there? Or is this simply a gap year between different eras of Heat basketball? We break it all down in today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day, Monday to Friday. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everybody every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. It's day 2 of free agency in the NBA. The Heat lost DeLon Wright to the Milwaukee Bucks. He signs a minimum contract over there. Paul George, since we last spoke, officially signed with the 76ers. The Sixers also re-signed Kelly Oubre. They added Eric Gordon, Andre Drummond. And now we're looking at an Eastern Conference where the 76ers got better. The Celtics are coming off of a championship and are keeping their guys. The Knicks got better by trading for Mikal Bridges, bringing back OG Anunoby, even though they did lose Isaiah Hartenstein, who signed with the Thunder on Monday. The Bucks are coming back, and even if they're not very improved, it's another year of Damian Lillard, Giannis, Doc Rivers. I would assume they'll be a little bit better than whatever last year's disaster was. And 24 hours into free agency, the Heat haven't done anything other than re-sign Kevin Love and their draft picks. And that's sort of what we're looking at here. And based on the moves that have been made, and it does seem like the major things are mostly off the table, even though there are a few names still out there that we're going to talk about later on in today's show, David. But I'm just going to ask you, where do the Heat rank in the East based on what has happened so far?
Not too far from where they've ranked over the last couple seasons, to be honest with you. Like, despite having won the Eastern Conference a couple seasons ago and advancing all the way to the NBA Finals, I think their rank has not changed really. Like, you could look at where they are from the roster perspective or where you might project their finish to be, but right now, like, you look at the teams in the Eastern Conference, I've got them 8th overall. And that might be somewhat optimistic. I'm not quite sure exactly what's happening with Toronto. They're probably going to be better than what they've been. Chicago, again, that's a huge question mark. They're probably going to be worse than Miami. I think that's fair. But let's start it out. I mean, as far as my rankings concerned, I've got Boston first, still the Eastern Conference. I've got Philadelphia second because I think the roster is much improved. I've got the Knicks third, Milwaukee fourth, then Indiana, Orlando, Cleveland, and Miami.
I basically have the same thing. I have Boston and then New York and then Philadelphia, but we can quibble about whether or not the Knicks, the Sixers. To me, that's a top tier. It's Boston, that's the Knicks, and the Sixers, and that's the 3 best teams in the Eastern Conference. And I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah.
And those might be 3 of the 4 or 5 best teams in the entire NBA, by the way. Like, the East just got really difficult to get through. It was that wall through Boston that you had to break through. Like, the road through the East went through Boston. It goes through the Knicks, and it goes through Philadelphia as well, too, up at I-95 in the northeastern part of this country. Like, that's the wall that the Heat have to break through, is through those 3 teams. But even beyond that, I think Milwaukee will be better, right? I think the Indiana Pacers are going to be able to build on that conference finals appearance last year. I don't know that they'll make it back to the ECF, but they will be good. The Cavs, we'll see what happens with Donovan Mitchell, but to me, the Miami Heat are in the same tier as the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Orlando Magic. And I think a lot of Heat fans would be like, are you kidding me? The Orlando Magic, little brother won the division last year. Little brother added Contavious Caldwell-Pope. And Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, those guys are only getting better. That team is really well coached. It had one of the most elite defenses in the league last year, an identity and something to build on. That's a good team. Cleveland, for all their struggles, still finished with a better record than Miami.
Yeah.
Still has, at least for now, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jarrett Allen. And I know all those 4 guys didn't fit all that well together, but there's not a whole lot of teams that can put that much talent on the court at the same time in the league. And the Cavaliers have just that top-end talent. With Kenny Atkinson there, I think he's going to be able to make that work a little bit more than J.B. Bickerstaff did.
Definitely.
I will say this. I think the Heat, it depends on whether or not you get an engaged and healthy Jimmy Butler, can the team stay healthy? I know that there's been more Barry Jackson stuff out there today about, hey, they like their team and they think they can be a contender when healthy. The problem with that statement is that the Heat are never healthy.
Mhm.
And being healthy it's not bad luck. That would be the exception at like 5 or 6 years into this thing. It would be the exception, not the rule. But I think they're right there with a chance to maybe climb into that second tier if you can get that level of Jimmy Butler.
I'm not so sure that we can count on that. Like I it's very difficult to project exactly what's going to happen this year. I think we've all, during this offseason, as tumultuous as it was from the way that the season ended, Jimmy Butler's injury, Pat Riley's end of season press conference, and everything that we've kind of tried to read between the lines, I don't think anybody expected it to play out quite like this. Like, there was the expectation that a move would be made, that you could trade Tyler Herro for something, that perhaps Jimmy Butler, and I think that was the most obvious domino to fall in terms of what had to happen in order for Miami to move forward. It was, well, I don't know if this relationship with Jimmy is sustainable, but apparently Jimmy was willing, despite everything that we've heard from Bernie Lee, his agent, from Jimmy, from sources all around. The idea was Jimmy wanted his contract first and foremost. If he is intending to buy into this season and use this as an opportunity, I don't know. I don't know what his end goal is, though. That's what it's difficult for me, because not only we're doing a 180 here in terms of where we were a week or 2 weeks ago, when it was a very unclear future. And even though it's clear now in terms of Jimmy's presence on the team, like, the idea of why Jimmy is returning to the team isn't as clear to me. Like, it's one thing to say he wants his money, and that's his priority. That's pretty clear. He wasn't going to get that from Miami. Pat didn't want to entertain that conversation, and a lot of people agreed that Pat probably shouldn't entertain that conversation, because Jimmy hadn't really done what he was supposed to in terms of last year being available and everything else like that. But now he's back. Is he using this as an opportunity to push Miami or to prove to the rest of the league, I've still got it, I'm still a superstar, I'm going to live up to the goal I
think
had?
it still comes down to money. I think it comes down to money and having the money where he wants to be. I'm wondering if the Heat just called his bluff, and it was out there pretty openly that the Heat were going to be willing to listen to trade offers for Jimmy Butler, whether it was from the Sixers or the Warriors or the Rockets or whatever. And I think Jimmy Butler kind of was like, oh, they called my bluff, and I actually don't want to move. I don't want to go to another organization. I've got a pretty sweet gig here with the Heat where I'm the star player and I'm treated as such. And I don't know that I'm going to get that star treatment if I go somewhere else where there's another star and kind of a whole other thing going on over there. And the other part of this too is he was going to be limited to how much money you can make if he signed an extension because of the over 48 rule. If he just has one more good year, opts out of his player option next summer, and then enters free agency as an unrestricted free agent, he could sign a contract that takes him to his age 40 season for a 4-year max if he wants it, right? Like, there's just more money and more years available to him. Not necessarily, he doesn't have to do the whole 4 years, but I'm just making the point, like, there's more money, more years available to him as an unrestricted free agent as opposed to signing an extension at his age in the NBA with some of the CBA limitations. So I still think it's pretty financial, but also a lifestyle thing where it was like, you know what? I really didn't want to get traded. I tried to strong arm the organization. They called my bluff, and it worked. And now I got to come back and basically what amounts to a contract year.
So, given that, I don't know how Jimmy has operated in the past in terms of like a contract year. Like, I mean, there was last time it was a contract year for him was his one season in Philadelphia. And he was pretty damn good, but that was a very talented team, and he was just kind of trying to fit in. And then he only really spent less than a full season with the group. I mean, is he going to look at this year and be motivated to carry this team and be the superstar that we've seen from him in the past? Is that his end goal here?
I think so, because if you just listen to Pat Riley at the end of the season, he said two things. You need to be engaged when you're out there, and you need to be healthy, and you need to play more games. And you lied to me last summer when you said you'd be more available. You weren't. And I think that's the expectation. So if Jimmy Butler wants to get paid by the Miami Heat, he's got to do the things that the guy in charge of the Miami Heat wants him to do, right? I think Pat Riley pretty much laid it out there. Hey, if you want to get paid, if you want us to provide this long-term commitment to you, then we need to show you need to show us something a little bit more. And to me, I hate being so like simple with the analysis here, but it comes down to just scoring for me for Jimmy Butler, not being so passive, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think one of the things when you look at last year, when Jimmy Butler scored 26 or more points in a game last year, the Heat were really good. The Heat were basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They were 9 and 2 when he scored 28 or more points in a game last year.
It's pretty decisive.
It's pretty decisive. I mean, that's a 60-win pace, but it was also only 11 games that he did it. 9 and 2 is 11 games. For 28 points, I feel like that bar isn't that high for an all-NBA caliber player when you've got guys averaging 28 points per game pretty routinely in the NBA.
For Jimmy,
And
especially given the change in the officiating too. Like I feel like that's going to be a real sticking point. Like I don't know how much of it is going to remain a point of emphasis next season, but given what we saw from the All-Star break on, like that kind of physicality was allowed to a huge degree in the playoffs and finals. I don't know that Jimmy's going to be able to pad those scoring stats with trips to the free throw line the way he has in years past.
But even if he doesn't, like you're a superstar, figure it out. And it's not as if he's Trae Young, who's slight and relies on the head fake, like the head throwing back and the flopping and all that stuff. Like Jimmy Butler's strong, and he doesn't need the fouls to score. Like he could still just strong arm his way to the basket. He's strong enough to bowl over a guy and still score. And it might not be the and one, but it's still 2 points. And you should be doing that more. I don't know. Like to me, that's not even an excuse. Maybe there's an adjustment period. And to your point, that's definitely a fair point to make. But after half a season of it and an off season to figure this out, that's not an excuse to me. And I'm not saying he has to go out there and score 28 or 30 a game, but he can't score 20 a game. He can't be 46 in the league in scoring. That's ridiculous.
Best case scenario, though, for the Heat, let's say we get the optimized Jimmy Butler improvements where they could be from Bam, Tyler, Terry Rozier's acclamation, etc. This roster basically the same as it was last year, with the exception of the addition of the rookies and things of that sort. Best case scenario for this team, I could see them being 4th.
Escape the play-in tournament. Right. Escape the play-in tournament. That to me is the best case scenario. I don't think that this team is a championship contender the way that it's built. I think that's pretty clear. They would need a lot.
Good enough to get there, not good enough to
way.
win. Yeah,
right.
Good enough to get there, not good enough to win it.
And good enough to get where?
To the finals.
To the conference finals or the NBA finals?
I think both.
I think this team is good enough to maybe, if the brackets break right, get to a conference finals. But if they're playing either of Boston, New York, or Philadelphia, and those teams are healthy, right? Then no, they're not good enough to beat those teams. But that's just my opinion. You've always been higher on the Heat's chances than I have. One thing I will say before we move off of this, it feels like the East has a pretty clear top 8 with the teams we've already talked about and listed, and a pretty clear bottom, whatever the rest of it is. You've got Chicago. It's 7. Thank you. Chicago, Atlanta, Toronto, Charlotte, Washington, Detroit, and Brooklyn. All of those teams either took a step back or didn't take a major step forward, and it feels like those teams are destined for the lottery. So the Heat, I think, are pretty firmly in at the very least, the play-in mix. Their goal is to be out of the play-in and make the postseason. And I think if you get a strong year from Jimmy Butler and better luck health-wise from the rest of the roster, then that's definitely a possibility. But what does that ultimately mean? I don't know. I think there's something to be said about making the playoffs and maybe winning a round and just kind of doing that and getting some development internally and all those things. But let's keep this going. Is there a player who can help the Heat move up a tier and change those chances if they don't make a move? What does it mean for the team next summer? We'll talk about all of that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports, and I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have wound down and we get fewer games, and all the sports they're not sportsing the way I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want, because all I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking us up all customers with a boost or a bonus every day. That's right, daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most of your summer. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Miami Heat talk every day, 5 days a week. even through the offseason. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on your favorite podcast app. You were mentioning the FanDuel stuff before. Miami Heat have gone, since the offseason started, from 3-1, 3.5 to 1 odds to 4 to 1 odds. So basically from plus 3,500 to plus 4,000 to win the championship. So their odds have gotten worse as the odds for the Sixers and the Knicks have gotten better. The Celtics obviously still the favorite to repeat here. So there's that. Can they move up a tier? We're only 24 hours into free agency. I still think that there's other things to happen, right? There's a long time between now and the start of next year, next season. Like, things change, right? Nobody saw the Drew Holiday thing happening in October last year. Boom, it happens, and that helps the Celtics go win a championship. So there's still a lot of time left here. One of the dominoes that have yet to fall, and as we're talking, Paul George has signed, Klay Thompson has gone to the Dallas Mavericks. Like, a lot of these names have been off the board, but the one that we have not gotten a resolution on right now is Donovan Mitchell, who has been Miami's top target all along. And so I think it's at least worth revisiting him right now because he has not yet signed an extension with the Cleveland Cavaliers. The word out of Cleveland over the last 2 months was, we're really optimistic that we're going to sign Mitchell to a new contract extension, that he's going to commit to us long term. We got Kenny Atkinson. He signed off on that. He loves all the moves that we're going to be making, all these things. And yet, crickets on the Donovan Mitchell front. And I do wonder if that means something might be going on here. Kobe Altman was asked about Donovan Mitchell today. Here's what he had to say.
We were just out in LA for his camp, his elite camp with Adidas. That was in a great space. I don't want to talk specifics until we can. We feel good about Donovan. He's in a great space mentally. He's healthy. He was out there with those young high school players, hooping in a really good space. Really enjoyed the fact that him and Kenny could sit down and talk about the future, talk about the team. He's still under contract right now, so we can talk about him as a Cavalier. And so, he's invested. He's really invested in what we're doing. And, hopefully soon we'll have more of a decisive answer on that for you. But he's been great. He's been super involved and super collaborative and very, very much pro Cleveland.
So that's the Cavaliers general manager saying a lot of words without saying anything, David.
Yeah, the Pat Riley special, right? I mean, it's a lot of double talk there because he didn't sound. It's not the kind of enthusiasm that somebody's got it secured. Like,
right?
Maybe he understands. Like, maybe he's like very superstitious, right? Like, we've seen this before. You don't want to jinx it. You don't want to act too cocky because at the 11th hour something could change. But that guy does not look like he is 100% sold on the idea of Donovan signing the extension and remaining a Cavalier for the next couple of seasons. Like, despite what words he was saying and the way he delivered those, I would not. That's not to say that Donovan might not actually remain with the team, but the way he was talking about Donovan is like, yeah, pro Cleveland. Like, what does that even mean? Like, I've never heard any player described about being pro the team that they go. They're pro that player. Like, he's pro Donovan more than anything else.
And what is he going to be, anti-Cleveland? Like, what does that even mean? It doesn't. Yeah,
I've hated Cleveland forever, despite what I've said over the last 2 years. So I don't know. It's a very
you're right.
It's unusual answer.
It's a lot of hemming and hawing and not saying anything. And for an organization that had signaled for the last 2 months through back end leaks and all these things. We're really optimistic that Donovan Mitchell, and what have I said here on this show multiple times? Yeah. Those leaks are coming from the Cavaliers. They're not coming from Donovan Mitchell. And until I hear anything from Donovan Mitchell, I'm not taking any of that stuff seriously. Right. And we have yet to hear from Donovan Mitchell on this, including this weird Kobe Altman hemming and hawing thing. We have yet to hear anything from Donovan Mitchell, and actions speak louder than words, and we have zero action happening right now from Donovan Mitchell. Plenty of players have signed contract extensions so far. Donovan Mitchell's waiting on something. My question is, what is that something? Does he want to see a move happen from the Cavaliers? Because the Kenny Atkinson thing was supposed to be the thing that got him there. And that whole process was a little funky. It kind of felt like they were really far down the path with James Borrego, which I would imagine would have been somebody that Mitchell had signed off on because they went so far down that path. For reportedly Dan Gilbert to kind of come in at the last minute and say, I actually want Kenny Atkinson. This is the guy you're going to hire. And so I do wonder if Donovan Mitchell's looking around and saying, like, well, okay, cool, we got a new coach, but what else? You know, Paul George just went to the 76ers, right? Everything that we're talking about that the Heat need to think about, Donovan Mitchell's sitting there with Cleveland. We got to the second round of the playoffs. We barely made it through the Orlando Magic in the first round. And the rest of the Knicks are getting better and the Sixers are getting better. What are we going to do? And do you think that may be something he's waiting on?
It has to be. Like, I if it's just a matter of like firmly committing to Cleveland the same way, like, let's say, and I know this might be bringing up some post-traumatic stress disorder here, but, you know, Damian Lillard, like, he was a guy who went through all these different changes in Portland. Like, he was committed, and he always said, you know what, whatever that roster is going to be, I've got my input. I'm a major part of this organization. I believe in this team, whether it's, you know, Robin Lopez and LaMarcus Aldridge, or, you know, CJ McCollum, or whatever comes next. I commit to this team, and that's why I signed the extension. I don't see that necessarily from Donovan. He's at a different point where his career and his legacy is not at the same stage. He's already played for 2 teams. I don't know that he's necessarily opposed to playing for a third team. And if he wants to be viewed, and we've heard this consistently for a long time, he wants to be part of a major market that can promote him and highlight him as the superstar that he has been over the last couple of seasons of his career. And if that's the case, I don't know that he's going to get that respect in Cleveland. You have to be a very unusually great player to be viewed as a superstar playing in
perhaps like LeBron.
Perhaps the best player in NBA history.
Exactly.
But other than that, I don't know how many people are like, yeah, Mark Price, that guy was really damn good, you know?
Underrated, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, no, to your point, and he wants to win at a high level, too. I mean, you could be thought of as a superstar of superstars in a small market. Giannis in Milwaukee, Russell Westbrook in Oklahoma City. It can happen, but you have to win at a really high level. And Donovan Mitchell has yet to win at that high level, even though he does have a ton of playoff experience. And I wonder, to your point, David, like, if he's looking around, he says, I really want to win at a high level, and this roster right now with the Cavaliers isn't the roster I need to win at that high level, so I can become that superstar. And if I can't do it here, can I do it elsewhere? And if you're the Miami Heat, as long as Donovan Mitchell has gone unsigned on that extension, you keep tabs on Donovan Mitchell. There's hope. There's everything there. And I do wonder if maybe the Heat Conspiracy West coming back. Let's do it. Putting the conspiracy hat on. Did the Heat learn from their mistake last year, allowing the Damian Lillard noise to get so loud to the point where it became unworkable between their front office and Portland's front office? Did they learn from that experience and said, Donovan Mitchell, if you want to come to Miami, keep it quiet. And maybe we do all the dealings behind the scenes. Make this the least public thing that you could possibly do so that you don't put Dan Gilbert and Kobe Altman in a tough position where it makes our job even harder. I do wonder, just as a conspiracy, if that's something that could happen. I have zero reporting on this. I want to be very clear.
Oh, yeah.
Do not aggregate me. It's just a conspiracy hat. That's all I'm saying.
It's just it's an interesting question, because I don't even know that there's a clear path to Donovan forcing his way there. Obviously, the playbook laid out by Lillard and his agent last year didn't work, and so you have to wonder.
I'm not signing the extension.
Right, but then that opens the door up for lots of teams to bid on Donovan Mitchell, not just Miami. And we've talked about it before. We opened that up when the possibility first came up, in terms of like what teams are likely to pursue a guy like Donovan Mitchell. Where would he fit? New York seems like that's no longer an option given everything that they've done there. So
Pelicans not an option. They traded for DeJounte Murray. The Houston Rockets are a team that had been rumored to be interested in Donovan Mitchell. Perhaps that's still an option. The Lakers seem to be kind of going the other way and saying, we got our 2 stars with LeBron and Anthony Davis. We want to put role players around those guys. They did strike out on Klay Thompson, but it doesn't really feel like they have what it takes to get Donovan Mitchell or into that business. But to your point, like, the same thing is he's still up for an extension. And you could tell teams behind closed doors, I'm not going to sign an extension with you. And you could sort of direct your way to Miami. And while everybody might know what's happening behind the scenes, the whole point is not making it so public, the way that Damian Lillard and his agent made it public, where it just
forcing
looks
Joe
like
Cronin.
like Joe Cronin has public egg on his face. That's the only thing these teams. The number one job for these general managers is to keep the job, and part of keeping your job is not getting embarrassed publicly. Like, if Kobe Altman has to trade Donovan Mitchell, I don't think he necessarily cares where he trades him to, as long as he just doesn't look embarrassed in the process, you know?
Is Miami making a huge mistake in waiting to let this play out? Because I think I've seen the argument, my answer to that is no. Like, I know everybody again is suffering from some traumatic response to last summer, where everybody felt like it was a done deal, it was this close. We've been hearing reporting about it getting done, etc. And it seemed like it was a foregone conclusion that Lillard would wind up with Miami. Miami would get their whale, etc. It didn't work out that way. Is Miami making a mistake by following a similar trajectory and timeline and saying, you know what, we have a firm belief that Donovan Mitchell is going to force his way out of Cleveland, albeit much more quietly than Dame Lillard and his agent did, and that eventually he's going to get traded, and if so, we like our chances of being involved in acquiring Mitchell. And to that point, I know a lot of people are frustrated with Miami's pursuit of a whale, that maybe they should get other lesser players. And my response to that is, I don't think those other lesser players are available. I just think that everybody sees getting, I don't know, like a Rui Hachimura or another high quality role player.
Right.
And I don't think those guys are out there. Like, you can't empty the powder keg for Alex Caruso. As great a role player as he might be, is he significantly better than what Miami currently has on their roster? And is he going to get them into title contention? Let's say.
Well, the problem is too, it's you're so limited in resources, and you already used one
the other side of it,
to
yes.
trade that. You traded one first-round pick for Terry Rozier, who I think is a high-level role player. I think that's that he's qualified as that. You only have 2 more first-round picks left because you just used the 15th pick in the draft on Khalil Ware, and I guess you could move Khalil Ware, but that's a little bit of like the car off the lot kind of thing, where it doesn't have as much value anymore. So you're limited now to 2 first-round picks and some of the rookies or the younger guys and a Tyler Herro contract or Duncan Robinson contract. Like, to your point, are you going to go all in on another high-end role player, or are you going to wait this out and see if that star is available? Or are you just saying, we don't really have the stuff to trade for any of these guys anyway? Mikal Bridges is going for 5 first-round picks. We've got Denny Avdia going for 2 first-round picks. Like, this is the new NBA world that we're living in. We just don't have the stuff to make this happen, and we're just sort of resigned to this being the team, unless we get a really lucky break and we're able to get Donovan Mitchell on the cheap, the way we were able to get Jimmy Butler on the cheap. That said, one more point on Donovan Mitchell. Plus, maybe there are a couple lesser names, bigger names than Alex Caruso, but maybe a couple lesser names that the Heat should kick the tires on. We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Heat. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. Let us know in the comments section whether you think Donovan Mitchell is a viable option this summer and if he is worth waiting on. Also, follow us on your favorite podcast app. To answer your question before, is Donovan Mitchell worth waiting on? He is. He's worth waiting on, but I think only because I don't know that the Heat have any other options. I think we're heading towards a run-it-back here. And if something in the NBA ecosystem were to break a certain way, that the Heat were able to make a big sort of landmark superstar trade the way that a Donovan Mitchell trade would be, then you go ahead and pursue that. But for now, this is just sort of the team. It's not even as if it's last year where they had all these open roster spots and all these things that they had to fill and potentially could go get a Christian Wood or a Kelly Oubre or these guys. None of that stuff's really on the board for Miami. This is sort of
what about
team.
the flip side of opening up cap space, right? Everybody expects Miami to be able to create this magical cap space, like trade Tyler Herro away for picks, trade Terry Rozier away for picks, trade everybody away for picks, just so you can have the flexibility to be able to acquire a player when they become free agents. I just don't know that that's the right move. Miami, their typical approach is to not take a step back so drastically, and I don't think that they want to do that. I don't know what you could get in terms of like the value for Tyler here either. What would Tyler, if he's viewed as your best tradable asset, right, or at least the one that you most likely want to trade, what are you going to get for Tyler Herro in an open trade market? Like, you're not going to get the Mikal Bridges package in return, that's for sure. So I don't know that
if you're looking to trade him, and you're exactly right. And then to go back to your original question, like if you're looking to trade him to create salary cap space and get draft picks back, easier said than done. What the Detroit Pistons, who I think make a lot of sense for Tyler Herro because they need shooting, all the reports indicate that they actually want to use that cap space to gain picks, take your
They
bad
just got
salary
Tim
and
Hardaway
get
Jr.
picks. Right. Like
Yeah,
that's sort of what they're doing here. Right. And
right.
they're not going to want to take Tyler Herro and give away picks. And by the way, the Pistons quietly don't have that many future picks available to them already. So for them to want to, and I have no idea, by the way, what they traded them for. Like they don't, like, I don't know. The roster doesn't really reflect the team that traded a bunch of future for. Anyway, does not the point. They're probably in the business of trying to add picks, not give them away, even for a player who makes sense for them like Tyler Herro, who's not ultimately going to move the needle enough for them. I think a team like Brooklyn did make sense for Tyler Herro had they had Mikal Bridges, but they're rebuilding. They don't want Tyler Herro now. They're not going to trade those future picks for Tyler Herro. A team like Utah with cap space, maybe, but they already have Keontae George. It doesn't really feel like the Tyler Herro player is the one that makes sense for them to part with draft picks for. So it's easy to just say, hey, dump Tyler Herro into the team's cap space and get draft capital back. And actually finding that deal is really difficult. And so if you're the Heat, you might just say, well, we're not going to just trade Tyler Herro for nothing. We're not going to John Collins him and trade him for a couple of fake second rounders just to open up cap space. And by the way, if you trade Tyler Herro's $29 million, you don't create $29 million of cap space because the Heat are so over the luxury tax right now. You would be actually creating zero cap space if you traded Tyler Herro. You would just be you would be creating more space between you and the second tax apron, but with no real way to improve the team. So what's the point of creating that space between you and the second apron? It doesn't make much sense for Miami to do that right now. I think they should, if they do need to try to find that flexibility, they should explore it, but I don't think it's as easy as just doing it. And so it's not something that I think the Heat are waiting to do or not doing or waiting on the Donovan Mitchell thing before they explore the Tyler Herro thing. I think that they had a deal on the table for Mikal Bridges. And it wasn't good enough, obviously, because the Knicks offered 5 first-round picks. I think Lauri Markkanen, another name that's out there, I would aggressively explore that if I were Miami. And I still don't think that they would have the stuff to get that deal done, right? We've already heard that a team like the Warriors is going to be pretty aggressive, that the Spurs could be aggressive in getting Lauri Markkanen. Think what you will of those fits and what that matters. Both those teams have more stuff that they could put on the table, arguably. Certainly the Spurs do with all the future picks that they have. And the Warriors, if they were willing to include like a Jonathan Kuminga or something like that, that stuff just makes more sense for Utah than Tyler Herro and a first-round pick. And all those teams have more first-round picks than Miami does, even Golden State. So, I think that they'd be aggressive in trying to get Lauri Markkanen. They might have even called Danny Ainge already and made an offer for Lauri Markkanen, who sounds like he's pretty available. But I don't know that they're going to be able to get that deal done,
Right.
What about Brandon Ingram? He's been out there. Just wanted to throw that name out there.
What's the team currently linked to Ingram the most now? Because I wonder, Sacramento. And they're in a similar spot. They don't have a lot in terms of what they can trade.
Yeah, unless they're willing to come off of the Keegan Murray guy. And I don't know if they are or not. And personal opinion, I hate Brandon Ingram in Sacramento. I think that's a really lousy fit. Your three top guys are guys who don't play defense. Does not sound awesome to me, but whatever. I guess that's maybe the strategy there is to outscore your opponent. But that's sort of the name that's out there. I'll answer my own question. I'm not a big fan of Brandon Ingram on the Miami Heat. They've got enough guys who live in the mid-range.
Yep. And he's going to be getting paid a lot more than Tyler Herro. Or at least that's what he's
because
playing.
if he's making 36 now on an expiring, but if you trade for him, presumably you'd have to sign him to an extension where he wants a lot. He doesn't have as much power as Donovan Mitchell, but he has some power in this, right? It's a little similar maybe to the OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam situation where it's like, you're really going to trade anything for me if I'm not going to re-sign with you? Like that's still some leverage that he has.
Yeah. So no, I don't think that's a possibility for Miami. It just isn't. It feels a lot like moving deck chairs, at least from a on court play sort of thing. And then there's also the negative aspect of taking on his contract. Like even though we addressed it yesterday, again, there were still people saying, "Oh, but Chicago's willing to attach a first round pick to Zach LaVine." It's like, yeah, but again, I don't know that Zach LaVine is such a huge upgrade over Tyler Herro, and you don't want to pay him twice what Tyler's getting paid. Like you're not getting twice the production from Zach LaVine that you're getting from Tyler. And so I don't see any reason why Miami would say, yeah, we want to pay somebody twice as much money for similar levels of production.
And even if you compare it now to what's going on in the Eastern Conference, if your big three, I guess, were Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler at 35 years old, and Zach LaVine with his injury history, is that better than the big three the Sixers just put together with Maxey, Embiid, and Paul George? No. Is it better than what the Celtics have in their starting five? They just re-signed Derek White to an extension? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So are you going to really put all your dominoes in that basket? Is my question. And I would say probably not. And that kind of leads me to my next point here. I know we're going long, but I think this is all related and I want to get to it. I'm calling it a gap year, and that might be an aggressive term because it's not as if the Heat are headed towards the lottery and just sort of giving up on the season. And I'm actually, the prospect of Jimmy Butler being engaged and these young guys taking a step forward and getting a little bit more health luck, I think the Heat could be a good team next year. I would not pick them to be in the finals or win the championship, but not be in the play-in tournament and win a round in the playoffs, that's something that I think is where this team is headed with and maybe win a couple of rounds with some breaks. But so it's not a gap year necessarily, but it is just sort of a run it back season. And I think you don't make a Zach LaVine or a Brandon Ingram trade right now, partly because of all the things we said, but the other big part of it too is that it doesn't commit yourself long-term to one of those guys where if you look at what the Heat are headed towards and why I'm calling it 1 year, if Jimmy Butler opts out of his contract next summer, has a great year, contract year, he's going to go make that money, but he opts out, the Heat can basically do what the Clippers just did with Paul George and just say, hey, it's been real, but we're going to let you walk because we're valuing our financial flexibility. And we know that in today's world, in today's CBA, we only get 2 max contracts. And we just feel like if they can make the decision next summer that if Jimmy Butler at 35 going on to 36 isn't one of the 2 max contracts that they want to give away, understanding that Bam Adebayo is obviously the other one where they just signed to an extension, then they could just walk away from Jimmy Butler and create immediately next year $30 million of cap space, real cap space, right, to use in free agency. Now, next year, depending on what happens with Donovan Mitchell, he could be a free agent if he doesn't sign an extension. Lauri Markkanen, if he doesn't sign an extension, can also be a free agent. Brandon Ingram, if he doesn't sign an extension, can be a free agent. Julius Randle, Miles Turner, Brook Lopez, D'Angelo Russell, Fred VanVleet, all these guys could be free agents. Not an awesome class, but those are the guys that are out there. But you can also do the thing where you just sign players to 1-year deals, maintain that flexibility, and then in 2026, you're looking at potential free agents like Joel Embiid, Luka Doncic, Kevin Durant, De'Aaron Fox, Steph Curry, who I think after this summer, who knows what happens with him long-term. Trae Young. Like, these players can be free agents 2 summers from now, and I think if you're the Heat, you're looking at this and saying, we don't want to commit whole hog into going into this next season if that means taking on long-term money, because we have an option 12 months from now into getting the thing that we haven't had over the last several years, which is real financial flexibility. And that's why I'm calling this a little bit like a gap year, even though I understand that that's not the right term.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't think gap year is right, but I think the way I've been kind of feeling about it is it's more of a last dance. And I think that's kind of a tangible.
Okay, I like it. Last dance. We could do the last dance thing. That's fine.
Because no, it really is. I think, again, the writing's on the wall. Last year was supposed to be the last dance, and I think they kind of indicated that, but it ended so abruptly, or to a point you've made many times before, it never even really started. Between the failure to consummate a deal for Damian Lillard, to having Kyle Lowry kind of hovering in terms of his $30 million and not really displaying much on the court, to the injuries that kept the season from really getting off to a decent start, to the injuries that impacted them into the play-in tournament and in the playoffs. It was just a season that never really was. And so I think the Heat front office, I don't think they have to do much convincing themselves in order to say, you know what, we just didn't get an opportunity to show what this retooled roster can do. And they might actually believe, and I kind of believe alongside that if they get a healthy Jimmy Butler, or healthy-ish and engaged Jimmy Butler, and they get Niko Jovic and Jaime Jaquez, and they get Bam Adebayo motivated and perhaps even making a change in position, they get some of these other retooled players like a Khalil Wheeler, et cetera, and they make these kind of adjustments on the roster, that things can break right for them, and they're pushing all their chips in because it's the same chips they've had, but maybe just kind of spit on him and put a little spit on him, polish him up a little bit, put him back into the center of the table, and hope for the best. And I think that's kind of where they're at right now. It's because there's no real other opportunity to do anything else. But next season, then when Jimmy opts out, then you can say, you know what? We're going to clear all the goddamn books. And then you can start to make those kind of wide sweeping changes. And that kind of will lead into a much more obvious gap season, to your point.
And to your point also, like there was never really that opportunity to make this last year the last dance because you didn't have the contract outs. Jimmy Butler was still under contract. There was no way to create that real cap space. So if you look at the way these, like the last dance happens for financial reasons for the most part, and the Heat have an opportunity now to make that pivot without doing any work, right? As long as Jimmy Butler does opt out. Now, he can always opt into his contract next year because it's a player option and kind of keep the Heat stuck to it. So we're all rooting for a really great year for Jimmy Butler for a lot of reasons, right? For a lot of reasons. Because, too, like, if he has this great season and he opts out and they go out and sign somebody and then they still have Jimmy Butler's bird rights and they could just say, you know what? We got 3 stars now and we didn't have to, and we could pay him. And there's a lot more options open up if Jimmy Butler has a great season. So, not to mention also would be a lot more fun of a season. One more thing on this before we get off of it. If Jimmy Butler opts out, they have $30 million in cap space. If this team is bad this year, in other words, if they're not in the top 8, if they miss the play-in tournament altogether and have a top 14 pick in the draft, in the lottery, their pick right now, that 2025 first owed to Oklahoma City, is top 14 protected. So they would keep the pick in a very loaded draft class in 2025. And having a lottery pick, you never know, just asking the Atlanta Hawks, you can end up with a much better pick than you thought you did in the lottery.
Would they entertain an option to train Jimmy midway through the season then, if that's the case? Like, let's say, again, knock on wood, let's say there's an injury to a key player. And
right, it would depend on how like the first couple of months would go, yeah.
Right. Let's say you're obviously lottery bound through the first few months of the season. The trade deadline comes around, and Jimmy's planning on opting out, or likely to. He's viewed as an expiring contract because he's kind of made it known, or his agent would make it known that he's planning on re-signing a deal this summer. Is he viewed as an expiring contract that you could try to acquire? Kind of similar to what Pascal Siakam was, right? This past year, like he opted out as well, if I'm not mistaken, and then he became a free agent. He re-signed with the Indiana Pacers. Is that an option for Miami and Jimmy Butler to pursue?
It's got to be, right? I mean, you just gave an example of that happening. So it would obviously, to your point, depend on how the first couple of months of the year played out. But if this just looks like the year from hell again, 2.0, like the way last season played out, then you can have that conversation with Jimmy Butler. You wouldn't force him out the door. You would just say, hey, we all know where this is going. Yeah. Would you rather be here for the long haul, or can we get something for you here? Because we all kind of know where this is headed. And if you're
in Toronto,
sign somewhere else.
Toronto wound up trading Pascal. They had to deal with OG and Anunoby too, so it wasn't just Pascal Siakam. And Miami doesn't have those concerns though. So
it would have to be with Siakam. Yeah, they were able to work with them to kind of figure out his landing spot too, and you would do it the right way in that way, and you'd say, all right, where do you want to go? And we'll try to figure that out. The problem is, you generally don't get as much for star players in the middle of the year as you do in the offseason. But then again, losing Jimmy Butler for nothing and getting something for him, I mean, that's I guess the reality that you would be faced with in that scenario. So, all right. I think that generally speaking, the Heat are going to wait on the Donovan Mitchell thing. That's if we have a to-do list here going forward, keeping tabs on Donovan Mitchell. And I also think that the Heat are smartly doing the free agent part of this. I know it's frustrating that the Heat haven't signed anybody yet. Looking at how the money is being doled out right now in offseason, there are going to be good players who don't have other opportunities other than to sign somewhere for the minimum because there's just not that much money out there. And teams are very wary of using their mid-level exceptions because of the hard cap stuff that it triggers and all these things. So I think the smart teams are actually might be waiting to use their minimum contracts, understanding that they're going to be good players that have to settle for veteran minimums. And I think that's maybe what the Heat are doing here.
No updates on Caleb Martin or Haywood Highsmith either. So
nope. We'll see what happens on them too. That'll do it for us today. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, subscribe on YouTube, and follow us on your podcast app.